you know that every profession and field has their heroes and superstars. Well, Dr. Brundtland is the hero of all of us working in development. So really, thank you so much for having you here. It's incredible to think that 30 years ago, nobody used to speak about sustainable development until the report. I am now part of a global commission on the future of work put together by ILO. And when they ask us, you know, in the commission, what we want to see from the report, we all said that we wanted something like the Brundtland report. So, and we don't know how to do that yet. So really, thank you so much. You know, Dr. Brundtland, I was rereading the chairman's foreword, chairwoman's foreword of the report, and I was struck by, as you said, how important it is at present to remember some of them. But let me just read to the public some of the phrases that you put forward there. One is, I quote, "Perhaps our most urgent task today is to persuade nations of the need to turn to multilateralism." I think that we all feel today multilateralism is also at stake in many of the things we are saying. And you said, rightly so, that the SDGs and climate change are a triumph of multilateralism. And that's why we need to take those agenda forward, because they are right now, as we said today in the board, the only narrative that is calling for collective action in the world. All the other narratives are for polarizing, you know, and fragmenting the world. These are the only narratives. So it's not only a development agenda, it's really the most important political agenda, as you said. Another phrase, if we do not succeed in putting our message of urgency through to today's parents and decision makers, we risk undermining our children's fundamental right to a healthy, life-enhancing environment. Life-enhancing, we should use that term much more, I think, today. So thank you again. Dr. Brundtland, it's a privilege to hear you. And I open the floor for the questions of the public. So you have the floor. We have 2 mics that are rotating here. So you have Liz here and Donald. Yeah. We will take 3 questions first, and then I will give you the floor. Please say your organization or name, or name.
Thank you. Can you hear? No? Should be on, apparently. I'm Tamsin Barton, and I'm a trustee of the School of Oriental and African Studies. Thank you so much for an incredibly inspiring speech. It's absolutely brilliant to look back and be inspired by all this effort over the decades, and it makes us feel we know we can progress more from there. But getting deeply practical and facing the challenges that are involved, you referred to UN reform and the importance of that happening. You obviously were head of WHO, so you probably have a very good idea of the sorts of challenges that are involved. And you've referred to the way in which multilateralism is at the moment very much under attack and on the run. So in that context, what do you think would make the biggest difference to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in the way of UN reform?
Thank you. Do we have there, Liz? Here.
Hello, Ben Sambrook from World Pencil. My question follows on, actually. Thank you very much again. You've covered just about everything. And then you said that we knew the answers way back when, and we just need to get on with it. And you also started off by saying that we needed to safeguard the United Nations, and you talked about artificial intelligence. I met a guy a couple of years ago who was doing some work on the West Coast fisheries policy in California, and they analysed how fishermen worked, how fishing communities worked, how fish worked on the individual level, not on a school of fish, but how an individual fish worked. and they chucked it all into a great big pile of algorithms, and they came out with a sort of Uber fisheries policy that you could use to have sustainable fish stocks in 30 years' time. So do you think that in maybe 10 or 5 or 20 years' time, the United Nations might be run by artificial intelligence?
Okay, another one. There is one there on the back, the lady. And then we will.
Hi, I'm Liz Hutchins from Friends of the Earth. It was a brilliant speech, thank you very much. You said that change happens when citizens get involved. Can you give some examples of when you think people getting involved, maybe in protests, or the voices of civil society has really shifted really big debates that you've been involved in?
Okay, so.
Well, I'll start answering your question there, because it's directly now. You can use an example that happened in Norway a few years ago. The new conservative government was careful in many areas, but they took a risk. They suggested to give doctors the right to say no to women who came and to seek abortion. Although we had had a law on abortion on demand since 1978, this happened 2013, and it wasn't taking away the rights, but it was again putting women into the situation where they cannot feel certain when they enter a door with a doctor's sign-on if they are going to be, pushed out or not. And Norway has been quite peaceful now for many years. Women started marching the streets, more than they had for about 30 or 40 years. And they stepped down within weeks. The government gave up that initiative. It's a very direct and precise example of what I'm thinking about. But there are other examples. You can, although there has been tragedy in the aftermath, think back to Cairo, when we were all sitting, watching the square full of people protesting their system. The system was changed, but, unhappily, that time, it certainly didn't only give good results, but it still shows many such examples there are, that when people move and people are willing to push, we have it also, the nuclear campaigns in the 1980s. People were marching against nuclear weapons, and it did have an effect on many issues. Now, then, when you ask me the question about what kind of UN reform would help promote sustainable development, oh, I wish I knew. Because as elders, we, 3 or 4 years ago, we looked into, together, analyzed what are there now on the UN agenda, or in the framework of what can happen in New York, there is a chance for a breakthrough. And of course, several of us have been through it. Kofi Annan, not least, in the middle of a reform process, where I was also part of his panel on challenges and change. He pushed for reform. We got responsibility to protect. But many of the other suggestions, including change in the Security Council, etc., the forces against change were so strong, and it was crisscrossing, of course, the 193 countries. So it became stalemate. Now, but I think we had a part in an important thing that happened. The new Secretary General was for the first time elected after having had public or open hearings in the UN. And we did play a role together with others, allied with others, to push for that change. And we got that one change. And it is clear we would not have had the present Secretary General, I think, unless those open public hearings had happened. It changed the atmosphere, it changed the conditionalities around, and I think, well, we have a good Secretary General, and he had to prove himself, towards a number of questions from many people. So it did help. Now, then artificial intelligence. I did mention this, in my speech, because I'm aware that things are happening that Gro, 79 years old, doesn't fully understand. I only know that it's important enough that unless we take it seriously, and unless we take this up with the young generation who do understand it, then we may really lose out. So maybe. But when you talk about fish, I have to share one experience. My Minister of Fisheries, in about 1987, came up to me in the Parliament building, in the Parliament room. We have a round room like this, and behind there, he pulled me aside and said, "Gro, do you know what the experts say? That we have to reduce the cod quota by 75%. They have now looked at the stocks, they have looked, at what is necessary from a sustainability point of view." And so I said, well, this is going to be a challenge. But you know that this is what we have to do. Oh, he went pale, I think somehow he was from the north of Norway. And for him, the fishermen and the fish of the coastal Norway was so central to development that he couldn't imagine we could do it. So I said, sorry, this is new times. When the experts tell us that we have to reduce the quota by 75%, this is exactly what we will do. So you can do it without artificial intelligence.
We will take 3 more, but with respect to artificial intelligence, dear doctor, you said all your speech was about values and ethics. Yeah. We have to surround artificial intelligence also with ethics and values. So let's take 3 more questions.
Yeah, this one.
Here, great. Donald, you have Tara there.
Great. Greta Peterson from the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. You mentioned the role of young people and how important they are. It'd be interesting to hear your views on what impact can they have on some of the changes that we want to see for the future, including universal health coverage. In many of the developing countries, half of the population is below the age of 18. What is their role?
Thank you. Tara?
Thank you, Dr. Brundtland. Nice to see you. Thank you for the lovely speech. You spoke a lot about the value of multilateralism, and I believe that in the next hour or so, the US is expected to say that they're leaving the Human Rights Council. And I wonder how you think the international community can best react to an act like that. Thank you.
Charlotte Middlehouse from China Dialogue. Thank you again for a wonderful speech. You said that decarbonising our economies is going to be fundamental to tackling inequality, and that inequality must be at the centre of our move towards development. And you gave a very helpful, specific example of tackling fossil fuel subsidies. by 2020. And I was wondering if you could give another example of what countries can do to decarbonise their economies faster.
Mm-hmm. Let me again start with answering her question. This was the third.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, you know, I said we have to price what matters. So you have to use the economic mechanisms in the way you have taxation in every country. I don't think there is any other way to get to the goals than to certainly use economic mechanisms as well, in addition to legal, regulatory aspects. So that's why fossil subsidies, you know, is contrary completely to what we need. And we need to price coal. The tax on coal has gained increasing support. Every economist knows that this is the only way. But it has also gained much more traction now in many governments and cities. CO2 taxation has increased in many, many areas. It's improving in that sense. So you need both, you have to, in the transportation sector, you have to make it possible for people to bicycle. You have to make it possible for people to be able to afford buying electric cars. And in Norway we did some years ago, maybe now 7-8 years ago, took away, we have high taxes on cars, took away all of it on electric cars. What happened? Well, we are the country with the highest number of electric cars anywhere. In fact, I think without Norway, Tesla would probably not have, survived. So, it is, but you need to use that kind of mechanisms, and to be able to do so, you have to have a majority in a parliament that understands the issues, and you have to have sufficient knowledge and awareness among people that they understand enough. The civil society, the voters. You need to have that kind of educational background. I mean, awareness about what's necessary, and the politicians have to speak out. They have to dare to say what is necessary. As to young people. Now, did I jump you? No, I was just wondering. This was...
Third, that was the second.
Oh, yes, it was human rights. Well, I didn't even know. I mean, I haven't seen the news in the last hours. But nothing surprises me anymore with regard to what can happen. And I mean, the US in many ways has been one of the leading actors on human rights. Not always, no, I haven't always agreed with them on everything they have done, but they have always seen themselves as a leading voice on human rights. And so it makes it even worse when that happens. However, it is just one more signal in the same direction of isolationism. And it's unbelievable. And frankly, it cannot continue. I hope. But none of us know. Democracy has many weaknesses. But we don't have a better alternative. So, maybe it takes more than 4 years, but I'm hoping no. For people to realize that there is a better and another way. Now, then the young people. The problem of, I mentioned also that we need to be aware of the growth in population. For many years, people haven't spoken much about it. And one of the reasons why is that the knowledge base, scientifically and with regard to social and health issues, is that we know what happened in the rich world, that as women and families got opportunities, access to family planning, and hope, knew that most of their children would survive, then reproduction went down and population stabilized in all of our countries. And it is happening in big parts of the world today, but not everywhere. And it is for young people in Africa. It is a challenge that there are so many, and that the services, the level of, how can they manage health enough, sufficient health care? They must, and universal health coverage is a must, because without it, we won't get to that level of that we have in our richer countries. But also education and employment opportunities, everything, when you have such an explosion. But in any case, young people are the ones to face the world and their future. This is why we must listen to them, and we must make them part of the solution. They must go out and do what they think is right. And they share on social media, not only hate speech, but they share each other's destinies also, in the positive way that social media has helped us.
Okay, let's go for the last round. Right, there and there. You have the mic. Sorry, I didn't see.
It's on, yes. Dr. Brundtland, thank you very much. It's Mark Lodge from the International Network for Cancer Treatment and Research. Someone once said that the difference between involvement and commitment is like the English breakfast. The hen is involved, but the pig is committed. I'm thinking about that because
I didn't get that.
The hen
because
pig.
Yeah.
Is that?
I'm thinking about that because it takes a long time often to reach a particular stage.
Yeah.
It took 15, 20 years to get as far as the MDGs, which were rightly, praised for a new era with the millennium. For those of us in cancer, the MDGs didn't do much because non-communicable diseases weren't really treated for that. But never mind, another 15 years, we've got the Sustainable Development Goals. Is there a lesson that we have to learn that sometimes meaningful changes take a long time, and so people who are actually interested in this have to really be ready for the long haul?
Absolutely. I mean, I was so often asked, let's say the report came in 87, already like 88, 89, journalists started asking me, why has the world not changed already? Yeah. And I continued having these questions decade after decade. And I explained generally two things. Yes, a number of things have happened. They had. But much more needs to happen. And then, as the Sustainable Development Goals finally came in 2015, I said maybe we should look around, and the climate agreement as well, and think that 28 years after the report, we have these two agreements. Maybe it isn't so strange that nearly 200 countries with so different backgrounds, historically, culturally, economically, couldn't turn around in just 3 or 5 or even 10 years and come to that degree of common understanding that it requires to be able to agree on these kinds of complicated documents and commitments. So, yes, we need to have patience, but we also need to speak out about what is necessary and don't lean back. Because unless we speak out and unless we continue pushing, it won't take 28 years, but it'll take 50 years. So, learning the lesson is lean forward, go on with it, because we don't have more time, no unnecessary time to lose. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I'm Paul Eakins from University College London, Institute for Sustainable Resources. Early on in your speech, you talked about equality of opportunity, dignity, and human rights for all. And I don't suppose there's a single person in this room who wouldn't echo the desirability of that. But you then called it social democracy. And in country after country, I guess I'm, like many people, had thought that we were kind of on a sort of trajectory towards that universality of values. And I've been rudely awakened, as with lots of other people over the last couple of years. And country after country has turned against social democracy, as you yourself have acknowledged in your talk. And I wonder, as a politician, among many other things, why do you think that is?
You know, when I spoke about social democracy, I gave you part of my life history, my values, and Barbara Ward's, which is why I mentioned she also came from social democracy. And so it's part of my story, it's part of hers. But I also said that by now, because it's a question of human survival and so on, you now have, this is a question for left and right, irrespective also of parties, which is the broader issues, as you say, of universality. Let me use my own country as the best example, the one I know best. In Norway, when we had a conservative prime minister, the second woman prime minister in 2013, it was the first time since 1981 with a conservative leader in Norway. She had some very difficult years in her party, losing elections before that. And I think maybe nearly gave up, but she is a tough person. So she stood up and she changed her party's profile. She said, let us talk about people, not money. In Norwegian, that is mensch, like in German, Mennesker, not millioner or milliarder. So she made a new slogan. She said, we are focused on people, not just budgets and taxation and money. So what has happened, in my opinion, in my country is the conservatives that I knew in the 70s and 80s, they are gone. My deputy leader once said something that I was very furious about. He said, we are all social democrats. He said that in 1981. He was a good speaker, and he thought that was a nice, interesting, quotable sentence. But I told him, why on earth can you say such a thing? Give away, our values. And yeah, okay. He is not alive anymore, but I know that he would share my opinion. He had already seen it happening. He had been in parliament longer than me. He was very young when he was a new parliamentarian. So he died like 15 years ago already. But meanwhile, what he said, he had seen already. And now I have seen it in the form that in Norway there is much more consensus now about issues that we fought hard about in the 1980s. I had to stand up in the 1980s and fight the conservative leader because he wanted to start privatization of the Norwegian health service. I was furious. I gave all in the TV debates with him, And who won? I mean, basically, the Labour Party and my arguments won. The conservative side gave up to try to undermine the Norwegian, health service. They have moved to be much more like Social Democrats, because that's the only way they can win majority in my country. Now, so that, I think, is part of the explanation. In history, the Social Democrats have pushed for a number of important systematic changes and reforms in European countries, and certainly in the Scandinavian ones, have been the architects. The others have taken it on. So that has undermined, it has diversified, into more parties and more also no real conservative party as we had 40 years ago. Okay.
Last? I think that James asked for the floor long ago.
Thank you very much. I was inspired by you long ago. I'm re-inspired tonight. I wanted to ask, one could argue that there's a third big plan on the table, along with climate, Paris Agreement and the SDGs, which is, it's called the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's from China. I don't think you've mentioned China this evening. That potentially massive program may have more money in it than the other two put together. It's increasingly being sort of blended with another Chinese notion of eco-civilization. Do you think there's any chance that it could be the biggest force for sustainable development?
Let's take that one. And the last one to close here, the young ladies here in the second row. Last question.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Brundtland. You spoke about hope, and you spoke about us needing to give hope to people. And as a communicator, that's one of the things that motivates me to do my job, to try to tell the kinds of narratives that will inspire hope in sustainable development. And I'm wondering, after all these years doing what you're doing, what are the sources of hope for you in sustainable development? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm starting answering your question now, because it is also related to the question about social democracy. Because in all these years, when I have been there, pushing, fighting, advocating, analyzing, and working with others, I was always hopeful that it would be possible for the documents that we worked on in the UN family and in agreements of the kind that came from Cairo, from all the other I mentioned, that some of the basic principles of the rights of women, the right to health, the right to education, and to overcome inequality or to fight for equality. This would be possible to get through there. The right to family planning, for instance. Many of these things took a long time. But gradually it did happen. And the final part of this was when people who had been protesting, deleting, putting in brackets, anything that said, we are for equality. That was the final stretch, in the Sustainable Development Goals process and debate. It took a long time before a number of countries gave up the fight against equality. But they did in the end. Because before that, they used fairness, many other words were kind of becoming acceptable. But to say that we are for equality, that was really far in here, really hard. But when that happened, it really gave me hope. Because that means that so many have understood that the big differences and the complete unacceptability of the great difference between people, this is not acceptable. And so in the end, they didn't dare anymore to fight against equality. This is my greatest hope in the whole Sustainable Development Goals debate. Because whether you look at this or that area of the total, it is all, I mean, if you understand the necessity of equality, and the sentence I took last year from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, then you realize that we have come a good way ahead. So I have hope. Now, was there one more question?
Yeah, China.
Yeah, China. You know, I have been observing over the years China. I was in China first time 1987. No, even before. I was there 78 already. That's a long time ago. I have seen China evolving. I have met many Chinese leaders over the years. And I have been impressed in the last, you know, Copenhagen was terrible. The Chinese leader didn't enter the room at all. He sent a junior representative from the foreign ministry to sit with the presidents and prime ministers of the world. And he was absolutely impossible. But in the end, after Obama pushed open his door, he agreed that we could have a common goal of no more than 2 degrees Celsius by 2050, and saved the Copenhagen conference. Now, they had already started to understand before 2009 that these issues are very serious. And they have started working hard on them. And of course, since 2009 and onward, China is changing. And the leadership of China understands this. So it is really something, again, that gives me hope. So that's a nice final statement, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Andy will close, and I don't want to compete with Norway, but I want to say only one thing there, because I think that is very important what you said about fighting cynicism and mobilizing people to understand that they have a voice, they have power, and the power of voting. So let me just say, Dr. Brundtland, that my country went through elections very recently, and the youth was mobilized because one of the candidates said that he wants to take Costa Rica out of the Human Rights Commission, the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, my country, that has been known to fight for human rights. And young people mobilized to make that not happen, not happen. They really understood that the vote was the power to really change things. And you cannot imagine how that reserve of democracy from the young people was important to do this. And part was because they know change is possible. Change is possible. So to fight cynicism and to show that change is possible is so important. So my government, the government of my country today, have 57% women in government, 46% women in parliament, and a 38 years old president. So talking about change, that is change. So your turn now.
Good. Very good.
Many thanks to all of you for your part in an incredibly rich discussion. It's been great to have you here. We'll be moving for the reception, I think, in the Maxwell room afterwards. But before we do, I just want to say 3 special thank yous. The first one is to our communications team at IIED. I won't mention everyone by name because they all mucked in, but they did a fantastic job. And the second thank you is to Rebeca Grynspan for her inimitable and fantastic moderation.
I gave the word. I did nothing.
And finally, of course, one more round of applause. It was an incredibly rich and inspirational speech and discussion. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Brundtland.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to have this. It was fantastic.